In the small, quiet town of Oakridge, there was an elderly canine handler named Clara, who had once served with distinction in the military, training some of the most elite dogs in the world. Now retired, she lived a peaceful life with her dogs, but her past was far from forgotten. When a ruthless biker gang rolled into town, looking to establish their corrupt empire and intimidate the locals, Clara found herself targeted. They thought she was just an old woman, vulnerable and easy to push around. But they didn't know Clara, or the power of her military dogs. What followed would tear apart the bikers' criminal empire, as they soon discovered that Clara wasn't just any elderly woman. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her dogs were more than just companions. They were her weapon. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button for our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming stories. Your support truly helps us share these hard-hitting stories with more people. The sun was setting over Oakridge, a small, sleepy town nestled between the forested hills. Clara, an elderly woman in her early 70s, sat on the porch of her modest cottage, rocking slowly in her favorite chair. The wind carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, the peace of the evening settling over her like a warm blanket. It had been years since she had worn the uniform, since she had led K-9 teams into dangerous missions across the globe. Now, retired and living a quiet life with her dogs, she had found a semblance of peace. But even in her age, Clara remained sharp, the years in the military having honed her mind and instincts into something that couldn't be easily dulled by time. Beside her, her two military-trained dogs, Max and Bella, sat alert, their eyes scanning the horizon as they always did. Max, a massive German shepherd with years of combat experience, sat tall, his powerful frame emanating an almost unnatural calm. Bella, a smaller but just as fierce Belgian Malinois, lay at Clara's feet, her ears twitching as she listened to every rustling sound around them. Clara smiled softly to herself. These dogs had been through hell with her, fighting side by side in countless operations. They were her family now, the only ones she truly trusted. She had trained them well, and even in her old age, their loyalty and ability were unmatched. The peaceful silence was interrupted by the roar of motorcycles in the distance. At first, Clara barely paid attention. She had heard the rumblings of bikers coming through town before, but something about this group felt different. The bikes didn't slow down as they passed her home, and the sound of their engines grew louder, more aggressive. Max's ears perked up, and Bella's head snapped to attention, her muscles tensing in an instant. Clara's fingers tightened on the armrest of her chair, a familiar tension creeping up her spine. She had seen these types of men before, ruthless, cruel, with no respect for authority or anyone weaker than them. The bikers were part of a notorious gang, and they didn't take kindly to people standing in their way. Clara rose from her chair slowly, her joints aching, but her mind sharp. She had spent enough years around military personnel and law enforcement to know trouble when she saw it. She had made a life for herself here in Oakridge, away from the chaos of the past, but she wasn't foolish enough to believe that trouble couldn't find its way to her doorstep. The motorcycles rumbled to a stop just down the road, and Clara's instincts flared. She knew these men weren't just passing through. They were here for something, and judging by the way they were eyeing her cottage as they dismounted, she had a sinking feeling that something wasn't right. Max and Bella stood with her, their posture stiff, their eyes locked on the men who were now approaching. The bikers were a rough-looking bunch, leather jackets, tattoos, and an aura of violence that hung in the air like a thick fog. One of them, a burly man with a thick beard and a patch on his jacket that read the Black Stallions, took a few steps toward Clara's porch. He sneered at her, his gaze flicking to the dogs with disdain. "Old woman," he growled, his voice grating, "you got a nice little setup here. Wouldn't mind having a place like this for myself. But it looks like you're not using it for anything worthwhile." Clara didn't flinch. Her gaze met his with calm defiance. "I'm not interested in selling anything to you. So why don't you and your friends turn around and keep moving?" The biker laughed, a low, mocking sound. You think you can talk to me like that? You're just some old dog trainer. We could take whatever we want from you. Max growled softly, the rumble deep in his chest, and Bella's body tensed, her tail stiffening like a blade. Clara raised a hand to calm them, but her voice remained steady, unwavering. You might want to leave before you make a mistake. I'm not as harmless as I look. The biker didn't seem to take her seriously. He took another step toward her, his eyes narrowing as he looked her over. Harmless? You're just an old woman with a couple of dogs. What are you going to do? Clara's heart rate quickened, but she didn't show it. She had been in situations like this before. She had stared down men who thought they were invincible, men who underestimated her because of her age and her quiet demeanor. But Clara wasn't about to let that happen. She knew what Max and Bella could do. They had been trained for situations exactly like this. And then, just as the biker raised his hand to reach for something in his pocket, a sharp, high-pitched whistle sliced through the air. Clara's eyes narrowed, and her lips parted in a slow smile. She didn't have to say a word. Max and Bella were already in motion, their instincts kicking in before the bikers even had a chance to react. Max lunged forward, his teeth bared, while Bella darted to the side, her speed and agility a blur. The bikers froze in surprise, their eyes widening as the massive German shepherd bore down on them. Clara's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Max. Bella. Stay. The dogs immediately halted their advance, their bodies tense, ready to pounce at her command. The bikers stepped back, confusion crossing their faces as they realized that this wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. The old woman wasn't just an easy target. She had power, and that power was embodied in her two highly trained dogs. The biker who had spoken earlier took a step back, his voice shaking with uncertainty. You trained them? Military dogs. Clara didn't answer. She simply smiled, her eyes hardening with determination. You should have left when you had the chance. The biker's eyes flicked nervously toward his companions, but before they could react, a booming sound cut through the air. The sound of more motorcycles. The rumble was louder this time, closer. And Clara knew instantly that this wasn't just a coincidence. Her military dogs weren't just a warning. They were the beginning of something much larger. The sound of the approaching motorcycles grew louder, their engines roaring as they tore down the road toward Clara's cottage. The bikers, still on edge from the aggressive stance of her military dogs, exchanged uneasy glances. The peaceful evening had turned into a tense standoff, and Clara was well aware that things could go south quickly if they didn't take control of the situation. Clara stood tall, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the man who had dared to approach her, this supposed leader of the Black Stallions. She could feel Max's muscles tensing beside her, his gaze locked onto the biker with an intensity that mirrored her own. Bella, ever watchful, stayed low to the ground, her ears perked, her body coiled with energy, ready to spring into action. The bikers hadn't anticipated this. Clara wasn't just some frail woman who could be pushed around. She had lived a life of discipline, of working with some of the most elite military dogs in the world. She had seen violence, lived through it, and emerged stronger for it. Now her dogs were ready to fight, not for her safety, but for the safety of those who couldn't fight back. The rumble of motorcycles intensified, and soon Clara saw them, a group of heavily tattooed bikers, just as imposing as the first, barreling down the dirt road. Their black jackets flapped in the wind, and the gleam of their worn leather caught the fading light of the day. They were coming for something, but Clara had a feeling it wasn't just about intimidation anymore. They were here to take control. As the first of the new arrivals skidded to a halt behind the original group, the leader of the Marauders, a towering figure with a scruffy beard and a scar across his face, dismounted. He surveyed the scene, his eyes flicking between Clara, the dogs, and his men, who were slowly starting to realize they had stepped into something they couldn't control. Well, the new arrival growled, his voice rough like gravel. Looks like we got ourselves an old dog trainer who thinks she's still got it. You were supposed to be an easy target. Clara took a deep breath. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her. It wasn't the first time they had assumed she was just an old woman sitting in the quiet of her retirement. But what they didn't understand was that her dogs weren't just trained to follow commands. They were trained to protect, to track, to fight. She stood her ground, her hand hovering near the leash attached to Bella's collar. "If you think you can intimidate me or my dogs, you're sorely mistaken," she said, her voice steady, but with a firmness that would have made any soldier proud. The first biker who had approached her hesitated, eyeing Max, who growled low in his throat, sending a ripple of unease through the men. The scarred biker, clearly the leader of the new group, seemed to think for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you, old woman?" he sneered. "But you're outnumbered. And once we're done with you, there's nothing stopping us from taking everything in this town." Clara's lips curled into a thin smile. She could feel the dogs' eagerness, their readiness to fight. The air was electric now, every second pulling her closer to the inevitable clash. The bikers had no idea what they had just stepped into. Then, as if on cue, the first of the new bikers reached into his jacket, pulling out a machete. The others followed suit, their hands moving to their weapons, clearly thinking this was going to be an easy fight. But Clara wasn't backing down. She snapped her fingers. In an instant, Max lunged forward, moving faster than the biker could react, knocking the machete out of his hand and sending him sprawling to the ground. Bella followed, a blur of speed, her teeth snapping in the air, her body weaving around the fallen man with effortless agility. The bikers froze for a split second, disbelief crossing their faces. They had never seen dogs move like this, not even from the most highly trained K9 units. These weren't just pets, they were warriors. Max and Bella had been trained in combat zones, in the heat of war. This was their element. "You shouldn't have provoked them," Clara said, her tone low, calm, but unmistakably commanding. The bikers, now rattled, tried to regroup, but they were too slow. Max, his jaws still glistening with the remnants of the first fight, turned his gaze to the next closest man. The biker attempted to draw his knife, but before he could even lift it, Bella had already closed the distance, leaping into the air and knocking him to the ground, her teeth clamping down on his arm in a vice-like grip. Clara felt her heart pounding in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "Sit," she commanded. Max and Bella immediately backed off, standing in perfect attention beside her, their eyes still locked on the men who were now trying to regain their bearings. They knew what their handler wanted. They knew what to do. The remaining bikers, now completely rattled by the speed and ferocity of Clara's dogs, exchanged uncertain glances. Their weapons were drawn, but their resolve was quickly beginning to crumble. The scarred leader was no exception. He slowly took a step back, his eyes wide as he realized he wasn't dealing with an easy mark anymore. "Get the hell out of here, while you still can," Clara said, her voice cold, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted only moments earlier. The leader's gaze shifted to the bikers who had been knocked down, still groaning and trying to pull themselves together. It was clear the tide had turned in an instant. With a scowl, he barked an order to retreat. He motioned for his men to back off, and without another word, the group of bikers mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life as they sped away, disappearing into the distance as quickly as they had come. Clara stood still, watching them go, her heart still racing. She could feel the adrenaline slowly begin to fade, replaced by the familiar calm she'd learned to embrace over the years. Max and Bella stood beside her, still alert, but their tension had melted away, satisfied with the victory. "That's what I thought," Clara said to herself, a small smile tugging at her lips as she gave Max a pat on the head and reached down to rub Bella's ears. "No one messes with us." As she turned to go back inside her cottage, her dogs at her side, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had been in battles before, some of them far more dangerous than this one, but she had always known one thing. With her dogs at her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. And the bikers, they had just learned the hard way that Clara, the elderly K9 handler, wasn't someone to mess with. The dust from the bikers' retreat still lingered in the air, but Clara stood on her porch, her hands resting lightly on the railing, her eyes scanning the quiet town of Oakridge. Max and Bella, ever vigilant, sat on either side of her, their heads turning with every sound, every rustling leaf, every bird taking flight. It had been a short but intense encounter, and though the bikers were gone for now, Clara knew that the battle wasn't over. In fact, she had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. She had felt it when the bikers had first arrived. There was something off about them. They weren't just passing through Oakridge looking for trouble. No, they were here to stake a claim. And once someone like that sunk their claws into a town, they didn't let go easily. The Black Stallions gang had more on their mind than simple intimidation. Clara glanced down at Max, who was still staring into the distance. The dog's dark eyes held an intelligence that went beyond instinct, and there was no mistaking the way his body tensed. He was waiting for something. And Bella, too, stayed on alert, her sharp gaze following every movement in the trees beyond. "They'll come back," Clara muttered softly. Her voice was low, but she spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough battles to know that no enemy could ever be fully defeated in one strike. They would return, likely with reinforcements, perhaps with a stronger show of force. But Clara was ready. She had fought too many wars not to see the signs. Max shifted beside her, and for the briefest moment, Clara could see the soft, loyal affection in his eyes. Bella, too, turned her head and looked up at her as if sensing her thoughts. These dogs were not just protectors, they were her family. They had been through it all together, and they were ready to do whatever it took to protect this town. For the first time in many years, Clara felt the weight of her past settle over her once more. It wasn't just about old war wounds or the long hours spent training military dogs. It was the fact that, deep down, Clara had never truly wanted to be out of the fight. She had spent so many years working alongside the most elite teams of K9S, training them for missions that had tested the limits of human endurance. But when the war was over, she had retired. She had tried to leave the violence behind. Yet here, she was again, pulled back into the fray. A rustling sound from the nearby tree line interrupted her thoughts. Max and Bella immediately stiffened, their ears perked. Clara held up her hand, signaling for them to remain still. Her heart beat a little faster, but her mind stayed calm. Out of the shadows emerged a man, slight of build but dressed in all black, moving with a quiet confidence that marked him as someone used to getting what he wanted. Clara's eyes narrowed. She didn't recognize him, but in a town as small as Oakridge, strangers didn't just pop up without a reason. The man stopped a few yards away from the porch, his eyes flicking between Clara and the dogs. For a moment, he said nothing, simply observing the scene. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost amused. Well, didn't expect to see you here, Clara," he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Thought an old woman like you would have stayed out of the way by now." Clara's fingers tightened on the railing as the man's words hit her like a slap. His tone was mocking, filled with an arrogance she didn't have the patience for. "I'm not sure I know you," Clara replied coolly, her voice steady, though she could feel the simmering anger beneath. "But I don't take kindly to being threatened or disrespected. You should turn around and leave now." The man's smirk only widened. He took another step forward, clearly testing her patience. "You know, I heard the stories about you. The K9 handler, the old dog trainer who thinks she can still intimidate people. But I'm not one to be scared off by a couple of dogs, lady." Clara didn't flinch. Max's low growl was the only sound for a moment, and the air seemed to thicken with the unspoken tension between them. Clara knew this man wasn't just some wandering troublemaker. His attitude, his confidence, it all pointed to one thing. He was part of the Black Stallions gang, the same gang that had harassed Oakridge earlier. "I said, you're not welcome here," Clara repeated, her voice sharper this time. "And I'll warn you once more, leave before I have to make you." The man laughed, the sound harsh and grating, as if he found her words amusing. "You think you can make me leave, old woman? You think you still have the power to stand up to us?" He took another step closer, his hand resting on the handle of a switchblade tucked into his belt. Clara's eyes never left his, but she felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the moment of truth. She had trained dogs to neutralize threats, to take down opponents who thought they were invincible. But this wasn't just about handling an enemy with precision. It was about taking back what was hers. Max and Bella were ready, their bodies tense, their focus unwavering. Clara slowly raised her hand, signaling them to hold. The man, still cocky, continued to approach. "I'm gonna enjoy watching you squirm, lady," he sneered, drawing the switchblade from its sheath. But before he could take another step, a sharp, high-pitched whistle cut through the air, clear and commanding. Max and Bella surged forward with a speed that took the man by surprise. Max lunged with terrifying force, knocking the blade from the man's hand with a swift, practiced swipe. Bella was right behind him, her teeth flashing as she clamped down on the man's arm, sending him crashing to the ground with a howl of pain. Clara stood unmoved, her eyes cold as she watched the man writhe on the ground. Max and Bella held their ground, their jaws firm, but they obeyed Clara's command, stopping just short of doing more damage. "Now you listen to me," Clara said, her voice quiet but filled with authority. "This is your final warning. Leave. And take your gang with you. You've pushed far enough." The man, now terrified, could barely find his voice. You're insane. You think you can stop us? We're gonna burn this town to the ground. We own this place now." Clara shook her head, her lips tightening. "Not while I'm still breathing. And not while I have these dogs by my side." She motioned for Max and Bella to release him, and the dogs stepped back, allowing the man to scramble to his feet, his face pale with fear. With one last glance at Clara, the man's shoulders sagged, and he stumbled away, muttering curses under his breath. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed in the quiet of the evening as Clara watched him go, knowing this was far from over. Max and Bella stood beside her, alert and ready for whatever came next. Clara had already faced the first wave, but the real storm was yet to hit. The man from the Black Stallions had slunk away, humiliated but alive. Clara stood motionless, watching him retreat into the fading light, her dogs at her side, their eyes tracking every move. She didn't lower her guard. There was something in the way he had walked off, shaken, but not broken, that told her this wasn't the last time they would cross paths. No, the bikers had underestimated her, but it would only fuel their hunger for revenge. Clara had seen it before. Bullies always came back, especially when they thought they had something to prove. And in this case, they had a lot to prove. Max and Bella seemed to sense the tension in the air, their bodies taut and ready for anything. Clara placed a hand on Max's head, calming him, but her mind was already running through the options in her head. She had trained her dogs for high-stakes missions, and now she would have to use every ounce of her experience to protect her town from the violence the Black Stallions were about to unleash. "I know, boy," Clara murmured as Max nudged her hand, his dark eyes filled with understanding. "It's not over." She turned back toward the house, walking slowly, her mind weighed down with the knowledge that the coming days would likely be filled with violence and chaos. The bikers wouldn't back down, and neither would she. She entered the house, her feet silent on the wooden floors, and closed the door behind her. Inside, the dogs padded around her, their presence a comfort in the storm she could feel on the horizon. She had already prepared the house for the worst: extra food, emergency supplies, weapons hidden where only she could find them. Oakridge wasn't a town filled with hardened criminals or professional mercenaries, but it had a quiet strength, a kind of resilience that could stand against any threat, no matter how dangerous. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of a motorcycle engine in the distance. Her hand instinctively went to the small radio she kept by the window. She clicked it on and listened to the static for a few moments before a voice crackled through. "Clara," came the voice of Officer Daniels, one of the few remaining lawmen in Oakridge. "You still get out there?" Clara smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Daniels. But we might not be for long. I just had a visitor." The black stallions are circling. They're not done with us. There was a pause on the other end, and Clara could hear the tension in Daniel's voice when he spoke again. We're aware. We've been getting reports all day. They're planning something. We don't know what yet, but we need to be ready. Clara nodded, even though he couldn't see her. I'm ready, but I'm not going to wait around for them to strike first. They've already made their move, and I'll make mine. You sure about that? Daniels asked, his voice soft with concern. These guys are dangerous. We've got the local volunteers, but we're outnumbered. Clara turned toward Max and Bella, who were sitting patiently at her feet, their ears perked, as if they too were listening for the inevitable. She had trained her dogs to neutralize threats, to track and locate enemies, but this was different. The bikers weren't just criminals. They were a growing force, backed by corrupt interests that could turn this town into a war zone. I don't care how many they bring, Clara said, her voice unwavering. I've seen worse. I've lived through worse. I'll handle it. She could feel Daniel's hesitation on the other end of the line. Just be careful, Clara. If things get too bad, we'll need you to fall back, not fight alone. Clara's heart ached at the thought. She had spent too many years fighting alongside soldiers K9S and law enforcement to turn tail now. She wouldn't run, not when Oakridge needed her. I won't be running, Daniels, she said firmly. I'm bringing the fight to them. The line clicked dead as Daniels likely cut the connection to deal with other matters. Clara set the radio down and stood for a long moment in the silence of her home. Max and Bella were still at her feet, calm but waiting. They knew the coming days wouldn't be easy. As Clara moved toward the back of her cottage, a sudden sound from outside caught her attention, a faint vibration in the ground that could only mean one thing. The ground trembled ever so slightly, and then she heard it, the roar of motorcycles. She stepped back toward the window and peered out cautiously. There they were, 4 motorcycles, speeding down the dirt road that led toward Oakridge. It was them, the black stallions, returning as Clara had predicted. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them, Clara could see the unmistakable shape of several other bikes. There were more of them, a lot more. Clara's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a few bikers looking for a fight. This was their full force, coming to finish what they had started. She moved toward the door, her pulse steady but quickening as she did. She wasn't going to wait for them to come knocking. She was going to bring the fight to them. This time, they wouldn't catch her off guard. Max and Bella padded silently beside her, their bodies a quiet strength at her side. She grabbed her vest from the hook by the door and slipped on. The weight of it felt familiar, grounding her. She was ready. The dogs stayed at her side, their focus unwavering, as Clara opened the door and stepped outside, the cool evening air hitting her face. She stood at the edge of the porch, waiting. The bikers were getting closer now, their engines rumbling louder with every second. Clara felt the familiar twinge of adrenaline surge in her veins as she stepped into the yard, her eyes fixed on the group of men who had dared to threaten her home. She raised her hand and gave a single, sharp whistle. Max and Bella, ever alert, immediately sprang into action. Max's body surged forward, his powerful legs eating up the ground beneath him as Bella followed, her smaller frame weaving expertly between the tall grass. Clara's voice rang out over the noise of the motorcycles, steady and commanding. "You've made a mistake, gentlemen," she said calmly. "This ends tonight." The roar of the approaching motorcycles grew louder as Clara stood her ground on the porch of her cottage. The black stallions had come back in full force, more than she had expected. A sense of cold resolve washed over her. She had lived through too many battles, seen too much violence to back down now. These bikers thought they could roll into Oakridge, intimidate her, and take over. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. She wasn't just an old woman with a couple of dogs. She was a veteran, a K9 handler with years of experience in some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. And her dogs were trained killers, more than capable of taking on whatever the bikers threw at them. Max and Bella were already in motion, darting through the grass with a precision that only years of training could achieve. The black stallions, so confident in their numbers and their violence, had underestimated Clara, and now they would pay the price for their mistake. Clara took a step forward, her eyes never leaving the group of bikers who were now skidding to a stop just yards away. The leader, the same burly man from earlier with the thick beard and the scar across his face, stepped off his bike and looked directly at Clara. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you, lady?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can stop us with a couple of dogs? We've got a whole army coming. You're outmatched." Clara's hand tightened around the railing as she looked him in the eyes, her gaze unwavering. "I've faced worse than you, and I'll face worse still. You won't take this town." The leader sneered, signaling for the rest of his men to dismount. The others did, and the air filled with the sound of boots hitting the dirt. Clara knew this was just the beginning. The bikers weren't here for a simple confrontation. They were here to break her, to take control of Oakridge, and send a message to the rest of the town. But Clara wasn't just standing in the way of their plans. She was about to turn the tables. Max and Bella had circled around the outskirts, moving like shadows between the tall grass. Their eyes glinted with a readiness that matched their handlers. Clara raised her hand in a quick signal, and in an instant, Max was charging forward, his massive body moving with incredible speed, pushing off the ground with a powerful thrust of his legs. Bella followed immediately behind him, her lean body slipping through the grass with unmatched agility. The bikers barely had time to react. Max reached the first man, a hulking figure who had just raised a rifle toward Clara. Before the biker could even squeeze the trigger, Max was on him, knocking the rifle out of his hands with a single swipe of his powerful paw. The biker went down hard, hitting the ground with a loud thud. Max wasted no time, spinning around to face the next threat. Bella, not far behind, launched herself into the air, her jaws clamping down on another biker's leg. The man screamed in pain, trying to shake her off, but Bella's grip was unrelenting. She twisted and tugged, pulling him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. Clara stood firm, her heart pounding, but her voice as steady as ever. "Get them, Max." "Bella, hold them," she called, her command cutting through the chaos. The bikers who hadn't been taken down yet stumbled back, scrambling for their weapons. But Clara wasn't about to let them get a second chance. Her sharp whistle pierced the air, and the two dogs instantly broke off their attacks, returning to her side. They were like soldiers, trained to respond to her every command. Clara's eyes scanned the group of remaining bikers. There were 4 of them left now, and they were starting to look uncertain. They had come in expecting a simple intimidation, but what they got was something far different. Max and Bella weren't just dogs, they were warriors, and with Clara at their side, they were unstoppable. The leader of the bikers, who had watched his men fall with growing fury, took a step forward. "You'll regret this, old woman," he shouted, pulling a pistol from his jacket and aiming it directly at Clara. "You don't know who we are. You don't know who's backing us." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even flinch when he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, the sound echoing through the quiet evening air. But the bullet never reached her. Max moved faster than any human eye could follow, lunging at the leader's arm with an explosive force. The biker screamed as the gun was knocked out of his hand and sent flying through the air. Max landed next to him, growling fiercely, his teeth bared. The man stumbled back, his fear evident. He reached for his backup knife, but before he could even bring it up, Bella was on him, her jaws snapping in front of his face, forcing him to drop the weapon. Clara moved forward now, her voice calm but authoritative. "You've lost. Get up and leave, or I'll let Max and Bella do their job." The leader, his face twisted with rage and disbelief, scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking. He wasn't used to being challenged, much less overpowered. But in that moment, he realized that he was facing something far stronger than a group of bikers. He was facing Clara and her dogs. "Get them out of here," he barked at his remaining men. He was done. He had realized the truth that Clara had known from the beginning. They were outmatched. Max and Bella had taken down nearly half of them in a matter of seconds, and they had been trained to do so without mercy. The remaining bikers, now visibly shaken, did as they were told, scrambling to mount their bikes and ride off into the distance. The leader followed suit, glancing back at Clara one last time, his expression one of grudging respect mixed with fury. "We'll be back," he spat, his voice low and threatening. Clara didn't flinch. "Not if I can help it," she said under her breath. With that, the bikers roared off, their engines fading into the distance. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating, but it was a silence of victory. Oakridge was safe, for now. Clara turned to Max and Bella, her heart swelling with pride. "Good job, both of you," she said, her voice soft with affection. The dogs stood tall beside her, panting but clearly pleased with their work. Clara took a deep breath and looked out over Oakridge. The battle had been won, but she knew it wasn't over. The black stallions were relentless, and they would come back. But next time, Clara would be ready. With her dogs by her side, there was no challenge too great. They had made their stand, and Clara knew she had just begun to fight. The sky above Oakridge darkened as the last of the black stallions disappeared into the distance. Clara stood on her porch, her eyes lingering on the road, watching for any sign of movement. Max and Bella were at her side, their ears still alert, but their posture had relaxed, sensing the absence of the immediate threat. The air, once filled with the sound of roaring motorcycles and the tension of the standoff, now seemed eerily still. Clara's hand rested on Max's head, the familiar warmth of the dog grounding her. Bella lay at her feet, her body curled with the satisfaction of a job well done. Clara could feel a wave of exhaustion creeping over her, but she couldn't let herself relax yet. She knew better than anyone that a battle was never truly over until the enemy had been completely neutralized. And the black stallions weren't the type to back down easily. "Max, Bella, stay," Clara murmured, her voice steady as she stepped back into the house. She closed the door behind her and moved toward the small kitchen. Her fingers automatically moved to prepare a pot of coffee, a habit she had developed over the years to keep herself alert during tense moments. The warm aroma filled the room, offering a small measure of comfort in the midst of the growing uncertainty. Clara leaned against the counter, her mind running over the events of the evening. The bikers had come to Oakridge expecting to intimidate, but instead, they had been met with force they hadn't anticipated. And yet, as successful as the defense had been, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Black Stallions had tasted defeat tonight, but they weren't the type to retreat quietly. They would regroup. They would be back, and they would be more dangerous than ever. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. Clara's hand went instinctively to the small drawer where she kept a gun for emergencies, but she paused when she heard the familiar voice calling through the door. "Clara, it's Daniels. You okay in there?" Clara let out a slow breath of relief and moved to open the door. Officer Daniels, a good man who had been a reliable ally in Oakridge for the past few years, stood on the other side, his face drawn with concern. Behind him, the town's small group of volunteers stood ready, looking to Clara for direction. "I'm fine, Daniels," Clara said as she stepped aside, letting him and the others into the house. "Just making coffee. But I'm guessing you didn't come here for that." Daniels shook his head. "No, ma'am. We heard the gunfire, and I figured we should check in." His eyes flicked to Max and Bella, who stood silently in the corner of the room, their alert posture a silent reminder of the battle that had just unfolded. "I take it you handled things on your end?" Clara nodded. "Handled it, but they'll be back. We didn't finish them. They were just testing the waters tonight. They'll come with more next time, and we'll have to be ready." Daniel sighed, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. "I've been trying to rally the town, but we're outmanned. They've got the numbers, the firepower. We're not exactly equipped for this." Clara met his gaze, her eyes steady and filled with resolve. "Then we make do with what we've got. We can't let them take this town. Not after what they've already done." We may not have the numbers, but we have something they don't. Determination. The group of volunteers behind Daniels nodded in agreement. These were the people who had lived in Oakridge for years. Farmers, ranchers, a few old military veterans, and families who had settled into this quiet town seeking peace. They weren't soldiers, but they were tough, and they weren't about to let a group of bikers tear their town apart. Clara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a softer tone. We can't wait for them to make the next move. We need to act first. I'll need your help. Daniels raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Clara turned to face the group of volunteers, her eyes scanning each of their faces, reading the silent determination there. I've been thinking about what comes next. We can't just sit here and hope they won't return. We need to hit them where it hurts. We need to take out their supply routes, their reinforcements, their power base. If we wait for them to come back and reinforce, we'll be too late. You want us to attack? Daniels asked, disbelief crossing his face. We don't have the manpower, Clara. We don't need an army, Clara replied firmly, turning back to look at her dogs. We need precision. We need speed. And we need to strike first. The group fell silent, considering her words. Clara had fought alongside some of the best in the military, and she knew how to plan an operation. She knew that, despite their lack of resources, they could make up for it with strategy and the element of surprise. She wasn't asking for a full-blown assault. She was asking for a targeted strike. Swift, calculated, and effective. She met Daniels' eyes again. I'll lead the team, but I'll need all of you. We're going to hit them at their weak points before they even know what's happening. If we can take down their key players, cut off their supply lines, they'll scatter. And when they do, we finish them. Daniels nodded slowly. All right, you've got our support. We'll do whatever it takes. Clara looked around the room at the men and women who had gathered here. They were all standing together, united by the same goal, to protect Oakridge from the impending threat. She knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, but it was a road they would walk together. I'll get the plans ready, Clara said, her voice low but filled with conviction. In the meantime, make sure the town is prepared for anything. The next time the Black Stallions come knocking, we make sure they leave with nothing. Max and Bella stood by her side, their bodies taut with the anticipation of what was to come. They had trained for this moment, the moment when they would defend their territory. Clara felt the familiar pulse of adrenaline running through her veins as she turned toward the door. Oakridge was still standing, but the fight was far from over. And this time, the Black Stallions were about to learn that Clara and her dogs weren't backing down. The night was still, save for the occasional whisper of the wind through the trees and the distant sounds of dogs barking from the nearby farms. Clara had spent the last few hours coordinating with Daniels and the volunteers, preparing them for the coming strike. The plan was simple, yet dangerous. She knew it would be risky, but if they were going to stand a chance, they had to take action now, before the Black Stallions could regroup and strengthen their hold over Oakridge. Clara stood in the shadows outside her cottage, her dogs at her side, their bodies tense, their ears flicking at every sound. Max, the massive German shepherd, sat beside her, his eyes never leaving the horizon. Bella, the quick and agile Belgian Malinois, paced lightly, her senses sharpened, waiting for the next command. Clara had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and tonight, they were telling her that the time had come to act. She wasn't going to wait around for the bikers to make the first move. They had already come close enough, already thrown their weight around. It was time for them to feel what Oakridge was capable of. The plan was simple: divide and conquer. Clara and the group would take out the bikers' supply lines, their fuel, and their weapons, cutting them off from their support. Meanwhile, Daniels and the rest of the volunteers would deal with their enforcers and set up defenses around town. By the time the bikers realized what was happening, it would be too late to do anything but flee. Max, Bella, stay close, Clara whispered to her dogs, her voice soft but commanding. She didn't need to tell them twice. They had been in tight situations before. They knew how to move with stealth, how to remain unseen. And that was exactly what they needed now. The sound of motorcycles reached her ears, but it wasn't the roar of hundreds of engines. This time, it was just a handful, likely the scouts or the stragglers from the larger group. Clara's pulse quickened, but she remained calm, her breath steady. She had planned for this moment. She had expected the bikers to send out a smaller group to test the waters before launching a full-on retaliation. This was their opportunity to strike. Clara motioned for the group of volunteers to move forward, their footsteps soft in the night. Daniels, a reliable man who had worked in law enforcement for over 20 years, had proven his worth many times over, and he was ready for this fight. He had a few local deputies at his side, all seasoned, despite their limited numbers. The motorcycles grew louder, but Clara knew they were still far enough out to keep the element of surprise. The town had grown quiet as everyone settled into position. The plan was to hit hard and fast, and that meant no room for hesitation. Every second counted. Clara gave the signal. Without a word, Max and Bella shot into the night, their bodies sleek and fast, disappearing into the darkness before anyone could react. Clara's eyes followed them, her heart pounding as she watched them weave through the trees. They would reach the bikers first. The element of surprise was key, especially when dealing with a group as dangerous as the Black Stallions. "Keep moving," Clara whispered to Daniels, who was leading the volunteers. They were on foot, their steps muffled by the grass, but Clara knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had done everything in her power to ensure this would work. They moved swiftly through the woods, the shadows their only cover. Max and Bella would flush the bikers out, drive them into the waiting arms of the volunteers, who would ambush them from both sides. Clara would lead the charge, with the dogs by her side. Once the first group of bikers was neutralized, the rest would scatter. Clara's grip tightened on her flashlight, though she knew they wouldn't need much light for this operation. Her eyes, however, were sharp enough to see every movement in the night. Her training had made her an expert at using the darkness to her advantage. She wasn't just walking into the unknown. She was stepping into it with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The motorcycles drew closer now. Clara could hear the engines thumping, a low vibration in the air. They were close, but they hadn't spotted her group yet. She waited, counting the seconds. Max and Bella had reached the bikers. Clara could feel it in her gut. Their noses and ears were attuned to every shift in the air. They had the scent of their enemies, and they wouldn't stop until they had neutralized the threat. Then, in a flash, it happened. The first biker screamed, a surprised yelp that shattered the silence of the night. Max had struck. Bella was right behind him, the two of them working in perfect synchronization. The motorcycle screeched to a halt as the rest of the bikers scrambled to react. The volunteers leaped into action, surrounding the remaining bikers. Daniels and the deputies moved fast, their bodies low to the ground as they closed in on the riders, who were now completely caught off guard. Clara's command to her dogs echoed in her mind. "Take him down, Max." "Bella, to me." Max growled deep in his chest as he wrestled the first biker to the ground. His massive frame bore down on the man, pinning him with ease. Bella followed, using her speed to disable another, her jaws closing around the biker's arm in a precise strike that rendered him helpless. Clara advanced with deliberate calm, her eyes focused on the bikers who were now trying to draw their weapons in a frantic attempt to regain control. But it was too late. The bikers were trapped, surrounded by a group of skilled volunteers, the element of surprise firmly on their side. The remaining bikers, 3 in total, attempted to flee, but Clara wasn't going to let them get away. With a quick command, she sent Max after one, while Bella charged the other 2, her speed and agility making her a blur in the dark. Max was unstoppable. He had the first biker on the ground, his body pressed against the dirt as he pinned him. Bella, just as relentless, took down the second biker with ease, her powerful bite forcing him to the ground in a heap of pain. The last biker, seeing his comrades fall, raised his hands in defeat. "Enough. We surrender," he shouted, panic in his voice. Clara approached slowly, her gaze hard, her dogs standing like sentinels beside her. "You should have stayed away," she said calmly, her voice icy. The bikers had no answer. They were broken, their plan falling apart faster than they could react. Clara had taken them down with precision, using every tactic she had learned from years of military training. Max and Bella stood by her side, their eyes scanning the fallen bikers, ready to protect her if needed. Clara nodded at Daniels, who was already securing the remaining bikers. "They won't be coming back, at least not tonight," Clara said quietly. "But don't let your guard down. They'll regroup, and next time, they'll bring more." The night had fallen quiet once more, but this time, the silence felt different. The Black Stallions gang had been dealt a heavy blow, their advance stopped cold by Clara's plan and the speed of her military-trained dogs. The town of Oakridge had been spared for now, but Clara knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Max and Bella sat beside her, their eyes sharp as always, scanning the surroundings even though the immediate danger had passed. The bikers were bound and disarmed, their bodies on the ground, battered but alive. Clara's heart still raced with the adrenaline of the battle, but she was already thinking ahead. The Black Stallions would regroup. They would come back with reinforcements. She had no illusions about the threat they posed. This wasn't just a gang. It was a criminal empire with deep roots. "Good job, Max." Bella, Clara said quietly, rubbing the heads of her two loyal dogs. They had done exactly what she had trained them to do, neutralize the threat without hesitation. And they had done it well. Clara had no doubt that they could handle whatever came next. The volunteers gathered around Clara, their faces filled with relief and exhaustion. Daniels approached, his hands still steady, as he checked the restraints on the bikers. His face was lined with concern, but there was a flicker of admiration in his eyes as he looked at Clara. "We couldn't have done this without you," Daniels said, his voice heavy with gratitude. "That was impressive. But what now? We've taken them out, but this gang won't just disappear." Clara nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the fallen bikers. She had been in situations like this before. A tactical victory didn't always translate to a long-term solution. "They'll try to regroup," she said firmly. "This isn't over. They won't stop until they've taken control of Oakridge. And when they come back, they'll come back stronger." Daniels sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was afraid of that. We're outnumbered. And if they've got the resources we think they do, we're up against more than just a gang. We're up against a well-funded operation." Clara's mind was already working, piecing together what she knew. The Black Stallions had been too organized for a mere street gang. They had money, connections, and influence. But it wasn't just about intimidation. They were building something. The way they had handled their business, the way they had targeted Oakridge, it all pointed to a much larger plan. "I don't think they're here just for Oakridge," Clara said, her voice low, but with a note of certainty. "They're building a network. This town is just one of many stepping stones for them. And if we don't stop them here, they'll move on to the next." Daniels looked grim. "So, what do we do now?" Clara paused, her gaze lingering on the bikers. They were all watching her now, their eyes filled with fear, but also with defiance. The gang leader, the same man who had sneered at her earlier, was lying on the ground, his hands bound tightly. His face was bruised from the scuffle, but there was a fire in his eyes that told Clara they hadn't broken him. Not yet. She walked over to him slowly, her boots crunching on the dirt as she knelt down beside him. The other bikers were watching her, silent but alert. They knew what she was capable of, and they weren't stupid enough to test her again. The leader glared up at Clara, his lip curling into a half-smile. "You think you won, don't you?" he spat, his voice low and hoarse from the fight. "You've taken down a few of my men, but you don't know who you're dealing with. The Black Stallions own this town now, and we've got more coming. You can't stop us." Clara met his gaze, her face unreadable. "I'm not trying to stop you, just give you a warning. You've overstayed your welcome. Leave Oakridge and disappear, or next time you'll have more to worry about than just a few dogs." The leader scoffed. "You think I'm afraid of a couple of old dogs? You're weak. You don't understand what's coming. The Black Stallions don't bow to anyone." Clara's voice remained calm, but her words were laced with steel. "You're wrong. You're not the ones who control this town. I am." She stood and motioned for the volunteers to move in. Daniels stepped forward, his face set in determination. The deputies began to round up the remaining bikers, ensuring they wouldn't cause any further problems. The leader was forced to his feet, his hands bound tightly, and Clara walked over to him one more time. "You've been given a chance," Clara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of hard-earned wisdom. "Don't waste it." With that, she nodded at Daniels. "Get them out of here. Take them to the holding cell. I want them alive for now. We'll need information. And when they wake up, I'll be there to make sure they understand exactly what happens when they mess with the wrong people." Daniels gave a sharp nod, signaling for the deputies to take the bikers away. As they were escorted to the makeshift holding area in town, Clara stood still for a moment, watching them disappear into the night. The volunteers gathered around Clara, their faces full of questions. "What now?" one of the veterans asked. Clara turned to face them, her mind already in motion, her voice steady. "We've won the battle, but the war isn't over. The Black Stallions will be back. But this time, we're not just going to wait for them. We need to hit them where it hurts, destroy their supply lines, cripple their support. We need to make sure they can't just keep coming." A man in the group spoke up, his voice shaking with both fear and determination. "But how do we fight back against something that big?" Clara met his eyes, her voice unwavering. "We fight smart. We use the resources we have, and we make sure they know we're not backing down." Max and Bella, still standing by Clara's side, seemed to sense the shift in her focus. They were ready for whatever came next. And Clara was too. This was far from over. The Black Stallions might have thought they could take Oakridge, but they had underestimated the heart of this town, and Clara's dogs were the embodiment of that heart. Oakridge might have been small, but was about to become the site of a war that would bring the Black Stallions' empire to its knees. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over Oakridge as Clara stood on the edge of town, watching the last of the Black Stallions being taken away by the deputies. The quiet of the night seemed almost unnatural after the chaos of the battle, but Clara knew better than to be lulled by false calm. This was only the beginning. As she watched the bikers disappear into the distance, a sense of unease crept over her. The leader of the Black Stallions had been tough, defiant, even in defeat. But Clara had seen that look before. It wasn't the face of a man who had given up. It was a face of someone who was planning his next move, someone who would never accept defeat without a fight. She turned away from the road, her eyes scanning the town. The streets of Oakridge were quiet, but Clara's instincts told her not to let her guard down. The Black Stallions might have been temporarily scattered, but they would come back. And next time, they wouldn't make the same mistakes. Max and Bella, still alert, padded beside her as she walked back to her cottage. They could sense her thoughts, their eyes never leaving her, waiting for her next command. They had become an extension of her, both warriors in their own right and partners in the fight to protect this town. As she reached her porch, Clara stopped. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. There was no more room for doubt. This wasn't just about Oakridge anymore. This was about something much larger. The Black Stallions had shown their hand, and now Clara had to make sure that they wouldn't get the chance to play it again. Clara's hand reached for the radio beside her door. She had already made contact with Daniels and the town's volunteers, but she knew she needed to take the next step. If Oakridge was going to survive this, they would need to act fast. With a deep breath, Clara spoke into the radio. "Daniels, I need you and the deputies to meet me at the town hall in 30 minutes. We've got a lot of work to do." A crackle came over the radio, followed by Daniel's voice. "We're on our way, Clara. What's the plan?" Clara didn't hesitate. "We need to find out where they're getting their supplies, where their backup is coming from. We need to hit their support system before they can regroup. We can't afford to wait for them to come back with more guns, more men. This needs to end now." "Understood," Daniels replied, the urgency clear in his voice. "I'll gather everyone. We'll be there soon." Clara let out a breath, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. It was hard to believe that a small town like Oakridge had become the battleground for something much bigger. But she had faced down larger threats before, and she wasn't about to let this one slip away. "Max, Bella," she murmured, as her dog sat beside her, their eyes never leaving her. "We've got work to do." Clara turned and entered the house. The old floorboards creaked beneath her feet, but there was no time to waste. She grabbed a map of the area, unrolling it on the table. It had been years since she had plotted an operation, but the instincts were still there, sharp and clear. Her mind quickly ran through locations where the Black Stallions could be holed up, likely abandoned buildings, warehouses on the outskirts of town, or perhaps hidden in the dense forest beyond Oakridge. She traced her finger along the map, her brow furrowed in concentration. Oakridge wasn't a big place, but the surrounding wilderness could hide a lot of activity. It was going to take more than a few well-placed strikes. They needed to find the heart of the gang's operation and cut it out. Max and Bella stayed close to her, their presence a steady reassurance. Clara knew the dogs could track their enemies with incredible precision. They had done it in combat zones all over the world, and now they would do it again, right here in Oakridge. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Clara's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at her waist, but she relaxed when she recognized the voice. "It's Daniels." "Open up, Clara." Clara moved quickly to the door, opening it to find Daniels and a few of the other deputies standing outside, their expressions serious. "We've gathered a small team of volunteers. They're ready to move out," Daniels said, his voice steady but tense. "What's the plan?" Clara stepped aside to let them in, motioning toward the map spread out on the table. "We need to find where the Black Stallions are getting their resources. Fuel, weapons, whatever they need to stay operational. We can't wait for them to make their move. We'll hit them first, where it hurts the most." Daniel studied the map for a moment before nodding. "We've got a few ideas. There's an old storage facility just outside of town. It could be a supply depot." Clara glanced at the facility's location on the map, her mind working quickly. "That's a likely spot, but it's a bit too obvious. They're not that careless. We need to get a little more creative." She turned to the deputies and volunteers gathered in the room. "Here's what we'll do. We'll split up into smaller teams. One team will hit the storage facility, another will search for any hidden routes the gang might be using, and a third team will keep watch in town, ready for any backup they try to bring in. We'll move fast, and we won't give them time to react." Daniels gave a sharp nod, his eyes filled with resolve. "We'll get it done. But Clara, be careful. These guys aren't playing around." Clara gave him a hard look, the weight of her years of experience clear in her gaze. "I've been through worse, Daniels. They'll learn not to mess with Oakridge." The volunteers exchanged determined glances, ready to follow Clara's lead. They had no illusions about what was at stake. They were fighting not just for Oakridge, but for their homes, their families, and everything they had worked for. With a final nod, Clara grabbed her radio again. "Max, Bella, let's go." The first light of dawn was just beginning to break over Oakridge, casting a soft golden hue across the landscape. Clara stood in the shadows, watching as the last of the volunteers readied themselves for the mission. The morning air was crisp and still, and Clara could feel the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on her. Max and Bella stood beside her, their bodies tense, their ears flicking at every sound, as if they could already sense the coming battle. They had been through enough together to know when the stakes were high, and Clara could see the determination in their eyes. She had trained them for moments like this, moments where their loyalty and skill would be tested to the limit. Daniels and the other deputies had already split into 3 teams. The first team would head toward the storage facility Clara had identified, while the second team would search the nearby woods for hidden routes or any other supply caches the Black Stallions might be using. The third team would remain in town, standing guard for any backup the gang might try to send. The plan was simple: hit the bikers before they could react, take out their supply lines, and cripple their ability to regroup. Clara wasn't going to wait for the Black Stallions to make the next move. She would bring the fight to them, and this time, she would make sure they understood exactly who they were dealing with. "Let's move," Clara said softly to Max and Bella. She didn't need to say more. The dogs were already in motion, following her lead as she began walking toward the outskirts of town, where the teams were preparing to split up. Daniels caught her eye as he moved toward his team. "You sure about this, Clara?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded, her gaze unwavering. "We can't afford to wait. We've got one shot at this, and we're taking it. Make sure your team's ready." Daniels clapped a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim but resolute. "We're with you. You know that." Clara watched him go, the weight of the moment settling on her. The town of Oakridge, for all its quiet charm, was about to become a battleground. And she wasn't about to let the Black Stallions win. Not while she still drew breath. Not while her dogs still had the strength to fight. The first team moved out quietly, their steps muffled by the soft earth beneath their boots. Clara led Max and Bella toward the edge of the woods, where they would find the supply route the gang had been using to transport goods into town. The mission was risky, but Clara knew that hitting them hard and fast was their best chance of taking down the Black Stallions once and for all. As they neared the edge of the woods, Max's ears perked up and Bella's body tensed. Clara held up her hand in a silent signal, her breath steady, her instincts on high alert. The dogs were sensing something, an unseen presence, perhaps, or the shift in the air that always preceded a battle. Clara's eyes narrowed, scanning the tree line. "Stay close," she whispered to Max and Bella, her voice low but commanding. The sounds of the town were distant now, replaced by the quiet rustling of leaves in the breeze. Clara's senses were sharp, every fiber of her being attuned to the movements around her. She had trained in worse conditions, fought in battles that felt like they would never end, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about taking control, about stopping an empire of criminals before they could destroy everything. As they moved deeper into the woods, Clara's radio crackled to life. "Clara," came Daniel's voice, sharp with urgency. "We've spotted a group of them near the storage facility. They're setting up. Looks like they're expecting us." Clara's heart rate quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Stay on them. Don't let them get the upper hand. We're coming in from the rear." "Understood," Daniels replied. "We'll keep them distracted. But hurry. We don't know how many are there." Clara turned to Max and Bella, who were both poised and ready. "It's showtime, team," she muttered under her breath. "Let's make this count." The three of them, Clara, Max, and Bella, moved like shadows through the trees, their footsteps silent, their bodies low to the ground. Clara's mind raced as she formulated the next phase of the plan. The goal was simple: cut off the biker supply lines, hit them from behind, and neutralize their leaders before they had a chance to react. As they neared the storage facility, Clara slowed, her body blending into the shadows. The smell of gasoline and motor oil filled the air as she crouched down behind a cluster of thick bushes. She could see the storage facility up ahead, a large building with metal doors and a few scattered vehicles parked outside. There were at least a dozen bikers moving around, unloading supplies from the trucks. Clara held up her hand, signaling for Max and Bella to remain still. She needed to assess the situation before making her move. The bikers were scattered, but their attention was focused on the task at hand. They didn't seem to be expecting an attack, not yet. Clara had a small window of time to strike. She looked over her shoulder, where Daniels and the other deputies were now in position, ready to move in. But Clara knew she couldn't rely on them entirely. She needed to take the first strike herself. "Max, Bella," Clara whispered, her voice calm but firm. "On my mark." The dogs stayed perfectly still, their bodies a coil of tension, waiting for the command to move. Clara raised her hand slowly, then dropped it in a quick motion. "Now." In an instant, Max and Bella shot forward, their speed unmatched. Max barreled toward the nearest biker, his massive frame crashing into the man with bone-crushing force, knocking him off his feet and sending him sprawling to the ground. Bella followed quickly, leaping onto the next biker, her jaws closing around his arm and pulling him to the ground. The bikers screamed in surprise and pain, their weapons drawn, but they were too slow to react. Max and Bella moved like a well-oiled machine, taking down one after another, incapacitating the bikers before they even had a chance to fire their guns. Clara moved in quickly, her eyes scanning the scene. She could see the rest of the bikers trying to regroup, but the dogs were already neutralizing them. The fight was over before it had even really begun. One biker, the leader of this group, tried to make a run for it, but Clara was faster. She sprinted toward him, her hand gripping the gun at her side. With one smooth motion, she aimed and fired, the shot ringing out in the quiet morning air. The leader dropped to the ground, his body crumpling like a rag doll. Clara turned to see the rest of the bikers on the ground, their weapons discarded, their attempts at resistance already fading. The Black Stallions had underestimated her, and now they would pay the price. "Good job, Max." Bella, Clara said quietly, her breath steady. "Let's finish this." The rest of the deputies and volunteers moved in, securing the area and taking control of the remaining bikers. Clara watched as they cuffed the last of them, her mind already on the next step of the plan. The supply lines had been severed, and the gang had been dealt a severe blow. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Black Stallions were still out there, and Clara wasn't going to rest until she had taken their empire down once and for all. The sound of bikes fading into the distance was the only sign that the immediate danger had passed. Clara stood in the middle of the chaos, now calm, the Black Stallions' supply line severed, their reinforcements stopped dead in their tracks. The once boisterous energy of the gang had been replaced with a dead silence, as the deputies and volunteers began gathering the bikers, securing them for transport. Clara's eyes scanned the area, the remnants of her plan unfolding in the quiet aftermath. The dogs, Max and Bella, stood beside her, their bodies still tense, waiting for the next command. They knew this wasn't over. Not yet. They had only dealt with the visible threat, the ones who had been physically present. The heart of the Black Stallions still lay beyond their reach. Clara turned to Daniels, who was overseeing the prisoners. He caught her gaze, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. "We did it, Clara," he said quietly. "We stopped them. But what now?" Clara didn't answer immediately. Her mind was already racing, running through the possibilities. She had expected the Black Stallions to be dangerous, but she had underestimated just how deep their influence stretched. This wasn't just a group of bikers looking for a fight. They were a criminal empire in the making, with connections that could be miles deep. "They're not just going to give up," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "They'll come back with everything they've got. This fight isn't over." Daniels nodded, his expression hardening. "We've got the town locked down. They won't get far." Clara didn't respond right away. Her thoughts were far from Oakridge and its immediate safety. What had bothered her all along, what had been lurking just under the surface, was the realization that these bikers were part of something much bigger. The Black Stallions weren't working alone. They were just the visible arm of a larger operation, one with resources, connections, and people willing to turn a blind eye to whatever they did. Her gaze shifted back to the bikers they had captured. She moved toward them, her boots clicking softly on the ground as she approached the leader, the one who had been so quick to issue threats, so certain that he was untouchable. The leader glared up at Clara, his bruised face twisted in anger. "You think you've won," he spat. "You've only delayed the inevitable. The Black Stallions are everywhere. You don't know who you're messing with." Clara bent down to meet his eyes, her voice steady and controlled. "Tell me who you're working for. Who's backing you?" The leader snorted, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You think I'll betray them? You think I'm scared of some old woman and her dogs?" He gave Clara a defiant stare, but the fear was there, too, flickering behind his eyes. It was the kind of fear that only came when someone knew they were about to lose everything. "I'm not asking for your loyalty," Clara replied coolly. "I'm asking for your survival. You're about to lose everything, and I don't want you to be one of the ones who ends up dead in the dirt. Now, tell me who's behind you, or your men will be the next ones to answer for it." The leader's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Clara thought he might remain silent, his pride and fear keeping him from revealing the truth. But then his eyes flicked to the deputies behind her, their faces grim, and Clara could see the struggle in his gaze. The Black Stallions weren't just a bunch of renegades looking to cause chaos. They were part of something larger, something that had deep roots in Oakridge and beyond. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice grating with reluctance. "You want names? You'll get them, but you won't like what you hear. The Stallions aren't just a gang. We've got people everywhere, cops, politicians, businessmen. We've been running this town for years, quietly pulling the strings. You think we were just after Oakridge? It's bigger than that. It's about control. It's about power." Clara's mind began to race, her heart hammering in her chest. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but what she was hearing only raised more questions. The Black Stallions weren't just a gang. They were part of an intricate web of corruption and violence, and Oakridge was just one small part of it. The leader hesitated, then spoke again. "You really want to take us down? Fine. You'll have to go after the real power. But be warned, there's more coming. And if you think your little town can take on what's coming next, you're wrong. You can't even imagine the reach we've got." Clara stood up straight, her eyes cold and unyielding. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice calm, almost eerily so. "This isn't just about Oakridge. But I'll be damned if I let you take another inch." The leader sneered, but Clara could see the doubt in his eyes now. He wasn't so sure anymore. And that was the moment she knew she had him. He had cracked. And now, it was just a matter of pulling the rest of string. "You want to save your skin?" Clara asked. "Then tell me who's at the top. Who's pulling your strings?" The leader met her gaze, his lip trembling, but then he spoke, his voice low and defeated. "There's someone higher than us. We've been working for the Langdon Corporation. They're the ones funding everything. The real money's with them." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The Langdon Corporation. She had heard the name before. It was a major player in the region, a company with its hands in everything from real estate to industrial projects. But Clara had never suspected they were involved in something like this. She turned away, her mind already racing as she formulated a plan. She needed more information. She needed to find out how deep the Langdon Corporation's involvement ran. But she knew one thing for sure. This was bigger than just the Black Stallions. And the fight she had started in Oakridge was about to become something far more dangerous. As Clara walked back to where the volunteers were gathered, Daniels met her eyes. "What did he say?" he asked, his voice low. Clara's expression hardened. "The Langdon Corporation. They're the ones funding the Black Stallions. And if we want to take them down, we need to go after them." Daniels swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation settling on him. "Langdon, that's big." Clara nodded. "And it's not just about Oakridge anymore. This goes far beyond us." She turned to Max and Bella, their eyes filled with loyalty and readiness. The real fight was just beginning. The Black Stallions might have been stopped for now, but the true power behind them was still out there, and Clara wasn't going to rest until she had taken it down. The air around Oakridge had grown heavy with tension, thick like the fog that occasionally rolled in from the hills. Clara stood in the middle of it all, the weight of the revelation sinking in. The Black Stallions were nothing more than pawns in a much larger game, their actions fueled and funded by a corporation with tentacles that spread deep into the heart of the town and beyond. The Langdon Corporation. A name that had once seemed like just another faceless entity to Clara now felt like a looming shadow, one that reached into every corner of Oakridge, perhaps even deeper. Clara could feel the shift, the knowledge that this fight was bigger than her or any of the volunteers. It was now a battle for survival, for the future of everything that had been built in Oakridge, for the very soul of the town. She couldn't let this go. The Langdon Corporation wasn't just connected to the Black Stallions, they were the masterminds behind it. If they were left unchecked, they would consume Oakridge and every town they touched, pulling every string, controlling every resource, until there was nothing left but ashes. Clara turned to Daniels, her face set in a hard line. "We need to go after Langdon. Not just the gang. Them. They're the ones pulling the strings. We can't let them get away with this." Daniels nodded grimly. I'll get the word out. We need to move quickly. But Clara, this is bigger than we thought. Langdon's reach is widespread. If we push them too hard, they'll come down on us like a freight train. Clara's eyes narrowed, the determination in her gaze unshakable. Then we'll hit them where it hurts. We'll cut them off from their supply lines, their money, everything. But we need to act fast. If they know we're coming, it'll be over before we even start. We'll need more intel, Daniel said, his voice low. Langdon's not going to let this go easily. We can't just waltz into their headquarters and demand answers. Clara paused for a moment, considering. I know someone who can help. A contact from my military days. He's a hacker. He might be able to get us what we need. Locations, files, anything we can use to break Langdon's grip on this town. Daniels raised an eyebrow. Hacker? You've got more surprises than I thought, Clara. Clara gave him a faint smile. I've had my share of tricks up my sleeve. Trust me, we need all the help we can get if we're going to take them down. Without another word, Daniels moved to rally the volunteers. Clara turned her attention back to Max and Bella. The dogs were alert as always, but Clara could see the quiet intensity in their eyes. They had been through countless battles, but this one was different. The Black Stallions were a formidable force, but Langdon's grip on everything from local law enforcement to business was something Clara had never faced. She needed answers, and she needed them quickly. The sun had long set by the time Clara arrived at the outskirts of town, the road leading towards a small, unassuming cabin where her contact, a former military intelligence officer named Jack, had hidden out for the past few years. Jack was a man who had once been a part of the operations that Clara led, smart, tactical, and a master at getting into places people weren't supposed to be. She pulled up to the cabin in her truck, parking off to the side of the dirt road, far enough not to draw attention. Max and Bella sat in the back, their eyes trained on their surroundings, the calm before the storm settling over them. Clara stepped out of the truck, her boots crunching on the gravel, as she walked up to the door and knocked 3 times. One short, 2 long, the signal Jack would recognize. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and Jack appeared in the doorway. He was older than Clara remembered, his face weathered, his eyes sharper than ever. Clara, Jack greeted her, his voice low and gravelly. It's been a while. Clara gave him a curt nod. Not long enough, Jack. We've got a problem, a big one, and I need your help. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, but he stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Come in. Let's talk. Inside, the cabin was sparse, just the essentials, with papers and gadgets strewn across the table. Clara could smell the faint scent of old coffee, and the flickering light of a single lamp cast long shadows against the walls. Jack had always been a man of action, and it seemed like nothing had changed. Clara sat down at the table, glancing at the various tech equipment Jack had scattered around. We need to hit Langdon, and I need to know everything you can dig up on them. Locations, key players, any weaknesses. They're the ones behind the Black Stallions, and if we don't stop them now, they're going to tear Oakridge apart. Jack's eyes flicked over to the dogs, who had stayed close to Clara, their bodies still and watchful. Langdon, that's not just a small-time operation. You're asking me to take on an empire. Clara leaned forward, her tone unwavering. I'm asking you to help me protect this town, Jack. We've fought too hard for too long to let them take everything we've built. Jack hesitated for a moment, and then sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. All right, I can do this. But you're going to need more than just info. Langdon's reach is long. If we're going after them, we're going after their entire network. It won't be just Langdon's men we're up against. It'll be the whole damn system. Clara met his gaze, her voice resolute. I don't care. I've been through worse. We're doing this, Jack, and we're going to take them down. Jack nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. You're just as stubborn as ever. I'll get started, but this isn't going to be easy. Langdon's not going to let us have their secrets without a fight. Clara smiled grimly. I never expected it to be. Max and Bella sat at her feet, the quiet assurance in their posture telling Clara everything she needed to know. The dogs were ready, and now, so was she. Oakridge might be small, but it wasn't defenseless. And with Jack's help, they would be taking the fight to the very heart of the Langdon Corporation's operations. The game was on, and this time, they wouldn't just stop the Black Stallions, they would bring Langdon to its knees. Clara paced the small cabin, the quiet hum of Jack's computer the only sound filling the room. Max and Bella lay in the corner, their eyes occasionally flicking toward her as she moved, always alert, always watching. The tension in the air was palpable. The Black Stallions were dealt with for the moment, but Clara knew this fight was far from over. Langdon Corporation was an entirely different monster, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. Jack had already begun to work, tapping away at his keyboard, pulling up encrypted files and corporate networks Clara knew she couldn't access without a professional. Jack had connections that could dig deep into Langdon's operations, into their hidden agendas and hopefully their vulnerabilities. Clara glanced over at Jack, his focused expression lit by the glow of his screen. "How's it looking?" she asked. "It's a mess," Jack muttered, his voice low. "Langdon's got layers upon layers of security. This isn't some small-town operation. It's global. Businesses, politicians, enforcement, you name it. They've got fingers in every pie." Clara clenched her jaw, her frustration mounting. "We need to start peeling away those layers." Jack nodded, but didn't respond right away. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes darting over the screen as he analyzed the network's architecture. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath. "I've got something," he said, pointing at the screen. "Langdon's operations go beyond just funding the Black Stallions. They've been using the gang as a front for something bigger: money laundering, illegal arms trade, trafficking, you name it. But this..." He clicked a few more buttons. "This looks like their next big play." Clara stepped forward, her heart racing as she leaned over Jack's shoulder to examine the screen. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "It's a list of transactions, shipments, and this is the kicker, tied to a set of upcoming deals they're about to make. This isn't just about Oakridge anymore. They've been planning something major. A deal with foreign entities, bigger than anything we've seen. They've got trucks lined up, weapons, drugs, and a lot of it's happening under the radar." Clara took in the information quickly, her mind moving in overdrive. She knew they didn't have much time. The Black Stallions might have been a thorn in their side, but Langdon was the real enemy, the one pulling the strings from the shadows. They were about to execute a large-scale operation in Oakridge. Maybe even the whole region was in the line of fire. "We need to stop this deal," Clara said, her voice sharp. "We can't just take down a few bikers and call it a day. If Langdon is moving that kind of product, we're talking about a criminal empire, one that could collapse entire cities, entire industries. We have to hit them where it counts, Jack. And we need to do it fast." Jack tapped a few more keys, scrolling through the data. "I've got a location. It's a warehouse on the outskirts of Oakridge, connected to the deal. They've been funneling resources through it for weeks. If we move quickly, we can intercept the shipment, cut off their supply, and hopefully deal a serious blow to the operation. But we need to be careful. Langdon's not stupid. They've set up plenty of fail-safes." Clara nodded, her mind already racing through the logistics. "I'll get the volunteers ready. We'll hit them hard and fast, and we'll leave no room for escape." As she turned to leave, Jack's voice stopped her. "Clara, you know what this means, right?" She paused, looking back at him. "I'm not backing down. You know that." "No, I mean, once we do this, we're in it. All the way. Langdon won't just let us walk away. This is going to escalate. They won't hesitate to come after you, your people, everyone." Clara's expression hardened. She had fought her whole life for justice, for the people she cared about. She wouldn't let Langdon or anyone else dictate how this town, her town, would live. "I've lived through worse," Clara said quietly. "We'll do what needs to be done." Max and Bella rose to their feet, sensing the change in Clara's tone, as if they too understood the gravity of the moment. Clara turned back to the door, her mind focused on the task ahead. They would stop Langdon's operation, and they would do it now, before it could destroy everything they had fought to protect. By midday, the plan was in motion. The volunteers had gathered, their faces grim, but filled with determination. Clara had briefed them on the operation, telling them what they needed to know, but withholding no details. Langdon was playing a dangerous game, and they had to be prepared for whatever came next. The volunteers had split into teams, with one focused on securing the perimeter of the warehouse and another on cutting off any potential escape routes. Daniels and a few trusted deputies would lead the charge, keeping the pressure on Langdon's men and ensuring that no one escaped. Clara, with Max and Bella at her side, would go in first. Her dogs knew how to take down an enemy quickly, efficiently, and without hesitation. Their speed, agility, and combat training would be crucial for neutralizing threats before they could even get organized. The warehouse loomed ahead as Clara and her team approached, hidden by the cover of trees and the overgrown land that surrounded the area. She could feel the tension in the air. Everything was about to change, and there was no going back now. Clara paused before giving the signal. She looked at Max, who stood beside her, his eyes locked on the entrance of the warehouse. Then, she turned to Bella, whose body was coiled with energy, ready for action. Ready. Clara whispered, more to herself than the dogs. She didn't need to ask them, they were ready, and she knew it. With a swift motion, Clara gave the command. Let's go. Max and Bella surged forward, moving through the underbrush with the precision and speed that only highly trained military dogs could achieve. Clara followed close behind, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the next few moments would determine the outcome of this battle. The Black Stallions were already on the defensive, but Langdon's operation was something different. If they succeeded here, they could stop the Empire in its tracks. But if they failed, Clara pushed the thought from her mind. She wasn't going to fail. As they reached the perimeter of the warehouse, Max and Bella went silent, their movements like shadows. They would handle the initial threat, taking out anyone who posed a danger. Clara's radio crackled to life. We're in position, Daniels said. Move in when you're ready. Clara's hand tightened on her gun, her finger itching to pull the trigger. On my mark, she said, her voice calm, but filled with an unmistakable intensity. Max and Bella waited for the signal, and when it came, they moved as one. The quiet before the storm hung heavily in the air, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of leaves underfoot as Clara, Max, and Bella approached the perimeter of the Langdon warehouse. They were so close now, so close to dismantling everything the Black Stallions and Langdon Corporation had built. The wind carried the scent of earth and the faint smell of oil from the warehouse. Clara's mind raced through the plan one last time. Hit hard, neutralize the threats, and destroy whatever they could to make sure Langdon couldn't rebuild. Clara's hand rested on her revolver, the weight of it familiar and grounding. The night before, it had felt like they were just going through the motions, stopping the Black Stallions and gathering intel. But now, as the day broke and the adrenaline coursed through her veins, she knew that this wasn't just about Oakridge. This was about stopping a force that had become far too dangerous to let live. Max and Bella stood beside her, their eyes scanning the warehouse, the tension in their bodies palpable. They were ready. Clara signaled for Max to move to the left, Bella to the right. The two dogs split without hesitation, disappearing into the tall grass like the predators they were, trained for moments exactly like this. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure of metal and concrete, its windows dark, but Clara could see shadows moving inside. She knew the Black Stallions weren't the only ones working in there. Langdon's people were probably inside, too. People who had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes, people who would stop at nothing to protect their empire. The radio crackled in Clara's ear, Daniel's voice coming through clear. We're set. The perimeter's secured. We've got eyes on the back. No way out for them. Clara nodded, her mouth a thin line. Stay on them. We're moving in now. Max and Bella were already in position, crouched low, their eyes locked on the building. Clara's pulse quickened. This was the moment she had prepared for. There was no turning back. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Let's go. The dogs surged forward, cutting through the brush like shadows in the night. Clara moved with them, silent and precise, her steps calculated. She felt the heat of the day rising, her breath coming steady and controlled. As they approached the warehouse, Clara could hear the sound of voices inside, bikers probably, and maybe a few of Langdon's hired muscle. There was no time for subtlety now. It was time to take control. Clara reached the side of the building, crouching low as Max and Bella took up positions nearby, their bodies still and focused, waiting for her signal. The dogs knew what was at stake, and their readiness filled Clara with a quiet sense of strength. "On my mark," she whispered, though there was no need. The dogs were already on edge, their training kicking in. Max growled softly, his body tense as he focused on the nearest entry point. Bella's ears were perked, her eyes tracking every movement. Clara's eyes flicked to the door in front of her. The heavy metal door was slightly ajar, just enough for her to see the shadows of the men inside. One of the men by the door shifted, and Clara didn't hesitate. She gave the signal. Max was the first to move, a blur of muscle and speed as he lunged through the opening, his teeth flashing as he took down the nearest biker with a swift, calculated strike. Bella followed just a heartbeat behind, her agility and precision making her a lethal force as she darted forward, knocking another man off balance. Clara wasted no time. She slipped through the door right behind them, gun drawn, her eyes scanning the room. The warehouse was dimly lit, stacks of crates lining the walls. But what caught Clara's attention was the group of bikers huddled near the back, talking loudly, oblivious to the danger creeping up on them. Clara moved quickly, her eyes darting between the figures. She saw 3 men, each armed, their attention focused on something deeper within the warehouse. She raised her gun, aimed and fired. One shot, straight to the leader's shoulder. He dropped to the ground with a grunt, the others spinning around in shock. "Get them," one of the bikers shouted, pulling his own weapon. But Max and Bella were already on them. Max lunged at the closest biker, his jaws closing on the man's arm and twisting him to the ground. Bella darted to the other side of the room, pouncing on a second biker and taking him down with a swift, controlled bite to the leg. The bikers tried to retaliate, but Clara's aim was flawless. Another shot rang out, and the second biker dropped to the floor, his weapon clattering across the concrete. The third man hesitated, his eyes flicking between Clara and the advancing dogs. But before he could move, Max was on him, pushing him against the wall with a fierce growl. Clara approached the struggling man slowly, her voice calm and controlled. "Give up. It's over." The biker's eyes widened, fear and desperation written all over his face. "You don't know what you're messing with," he spat, but there was no conviction in his words. Clara had already won. She knew it, and he knew it. She stepped closer, her gun trained on him. "Tell me where Langdon is. I want answers now." The man's lips trembled, but before he could answer, another sound came from behind them. Clara turned, her instincts immediately on alert. More bikers, more muscle. But this time, there was something else. The heavy rumble of vehicles approaching, tires screeching in the distance. "They're bringing reinforcements," Danielle's voice crackled through Clara's earpiece. "Clara, we've got incoming. You need to get out of there." Clara's heart raced. She had no time to lose. "Where's Langdon?" she demanded again, her voice icy. The biker's expression faltered, and then, with a last-ditch effort to avoid the dog's attack, he spoke. "Langdon's not here. They've got another facility, hidden. It's all there. The deal, the money, everything. You want Langdon? You're going to have to find them at the docks. Shipping warehouse. That's where it's all going down." Clara's mind raced. She heard of the docks, where the biggest shipments came in and out of Oakridge. It made sense. If Langdon was running a global operation, the docks would be their hub. "Thanks," Clara said, her voice cold, before she gestured to Max and Bella to release the biker. "We've got work to do." With that, Clara turned and ran, her dogs at her side, racing toward the back of the warehouse. The reinforcements were getting closer, but there was no time to waste. Langdon's operation was bigger than Oakridge, and they had just scratched the surface. The next step was at the docks. And Clara wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. The air was thick with tension as Clara sprinted toward the exit of the warehouse, the sound of boots pounding behind her signaling the arrival of reinforcements. Max and Bella, both agile and fierce, kept pace with Clara, their bodies sleek as they moved through the shadows, their ears twitching, alert to every sound. Clara could feel the pulse of adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was it, the final phase of the operation. Langdon had to be stopped, and they couldn't afford to let this slip away. As they neared the door, the sound of motorcycles revving grew louder. The bikers hadn't given up. They were mobilizing fast, but Clara had the advantage. She had the intel, and she was one step ahead. The docks were their next destination, the true heart of Langdon's operation, and Clara had no intention of letting Langdon or his men escape. Daniel's voice crackled through Clara's earpiece. "Clara, reinforcements are almost there. We've got your back, but you've got to move quickly." "I'm on my way," Clara said through gritted teeth, her grip tight on her revolver. She reached the edge of the warehouse and saw the first few bikers trying to organize, weapons drawn and ready. Clara didn't hesitate. She raised her gun, her aim steady and precise, and fired 2 quick shots. The first biker went down immediately, and the second stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, his weapon falling to the ground. Max and Bella were already ahead of her, charging toward the bikers with the speed and ferocity of trained predators. Max took down the first man with a single, powerful lunge, while Bella was right behind him, her smaller, quicker frame making her nearly impossible to track as she took down the second biker with a well-placed strike to the leg. Clara didn't stop. She sprinted toward the back of the warehouse, her mind focused entirely on the docks. Langdon was still out there, somewhere, overseeing the final stages of his operation. And Clara wasn't about to let him slip away. She and her dogs had taken down the black stallions, but Langdon was the true mastermind and the true danger. As they rounded the corner, the sounds of reinforcements grew louder. It wasn't just a few bikers now. Clara could see headlights cutting through the dark, the glint of metal shining in the distance. The black stallions weren't giving up. They were desperate now, and they were coming at full force. Clara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't about to be cornered, not this time. She made a quick decision. "Max, Bella, with me." Clara barked, her voice sharp. The dogs immediately fell in line, ready to move. Clara ducked behind a stack of crates as a group of bikers rounded the corner, guns drawn. There were at least a dozen of them, their faces twisted with anger and desperation. They were blocking the road, their bodies stiff, with the anticipation of a fight. But Clara wasn't interested in fighting them head-on. Not now. Not when Langdon was the real target. She raised her hand, signaling Max and Bella. The dogs moved swiftly, silently, their bodies cutting through the dark like shadows. Max pounced on the first biker, knocking him off his bike with a quick swipe of his paw. Bella, ever agile, darted to the side, tackling another biker from behind and bringing him to the ground with a force that left him gasping for breath. Clara was already moving, weaving through the group of bikers, her revolver flashing in the dim light. Another shot rang out, and the closest biker dropped, his weapon falling from his hand. The others hesitated, their eyes darting between Clara and the retreating dogs, who were still taking down bikers with brutal precision. But Clara wasn't stopping. She kept moving, pushing through the chaos, her eyes locked on the headlights in the distance. The docks were close, so close now. Max and Bella had cleared the area, the remaining bikers struggling to regroup, but Clara was already on her way to the docks. The black stallions had been decimated for now, but Langdon's empire was far from over. The real fight was just beginning. The docks were quiet, the vast stretch of water barely visible in the fading light. But Clara could sense the danger, the weight of it settling over her like a heavy blanket. Langdon was here. She could feel it. This wasn't just a small-time operation anymore. This was the final act, the one that would either break Langdon or see him take over everything. Clara slowed as she approached the entrance to the warehouse at the docks. The large metal doors were half open, a faint light flickering from inside. She knew Langdon's people wouldn't be far behind, but she also knew they weren't expecting an attack from her. Clara had studied Langdon's methods, watched their moves, and she knew that if they wanted to survive this fight, they had to take them by surprise. "Max, Bella, stay close," Clara said, her voice low and steady. She had no idea what lay inside, but she knew her dogs would be her best asset. Their training was flawless. Together, they could take down anything. They approached the door slowly, Clara crouching low, the dogs following her lead. The heavy scent of salt water and rust filled the air as they slipped through the gap in the door. Inside, the warehouse was bustling with activity. Boxes of supplies, guns, drugs, and other illicit goods were stacked high, ready to be shipped out. A few of Langdon's men moved around the room, unloading crates and organizing shipments. Clara's eyes locked on the man standing at the far end of the room. He wasn't wearing the same rugged biker attire as the others. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture calm, controlled. The man in charge, Langdon. Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She wasn't here to play games anymore. She had come to finish this, to take Langdon down and stop the operation before it could expand any further. She signaled Max and Bella, and the dogs immediately moved in. They were silent, their bodies moving like shadows, their eyes locked on their target. Langdon turned just as Clara stepped into the room, her gun raised. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down Clara's spine. Clara," Langdon said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I've been expecting you." Clara's grip on her revolver tightened. "Your empire ends here." Langdon's smile widened. "You think you've won? You stopped a few small shipments, a few gang members. But you're too late. The real operation is already underway. You've already lost." Clara didn't hesitate. "Not yet. Not while I'm still standing." Max and Bella were already on the move, but Langdon raised a hand, signaling for his men to step back. "You think your dogs can stop me?" he sneered. "You're a fool." Clara's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you, Langdon, and neither are my dogs." With that, she fired. If you enjoyed this story, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where your support means the world to us. We look forward to bringing you more content that inspires growth, joy, and purpose. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.